There is a familiar story about the relationship between the technologies grouped under the term AI and the practices grouped under the term art. This is a story of equivalence and inevitable replacement. The first time I heard of text-to-image models was in April 2022, and already the emergence of this technology was enmeshed with the end of illustrators. Alex Tapp, the CEO of a think tank, tweeted a screenshot of an exchange between Sam Altman from OpenAI and another Twitter user. Have an idea? Reply with a caption. I'll generate 20 or so, had written Altman. A rabbit detective sitting on a park bench and reading a newspaper in a Victorian setting, had answered Mikko Kutinen, a software engineer. A few minutes later, Altman posted this picture. But Alex Tapp, to whom I had seen this exchange, didn't merely report it, but also commented on it, writing, "Not gonna lie, didn't expect illustrators to be one of the first human jobs that artificial intelligence completely displaces, but here we are." For him, this interaction was not merely a promotional exchange between a CEO and a consumer, but a representation of Illustrator's profession as a whole. It included someone, a client, providing a text to someone else, an illustrator, who responded with an image. I see two common traps in how this story frames technology, artists, and their relations. And looking at these two traps, I would like you to see that the issue isn't machine versus humans, but workers versus capital. The first trap is reducing illustration to a sequence of text to image. Comparing text to image models with illustrators isn't a problem just because it's unfair to compare humans with machines, but because in our field, the relations between text and images look more like this. The interactions between text and images are incredibly varied and diverse. It could be discussion between an editor and an art director. It could be the brief that an art director sends to an illustrator, the captions under the sketches that illustrators send to the art director, the feedback on the sketches. So the question I'm interested in this research isn't so much about machines replacing people, but about whose labor gets erased and whose labor remains when we talk about text to image as an organization of labor. So this is trap number one, the reduction to a text to image sequence. The second trap is the reduction of the terms text and image themselves. What struck me in the exchange I just mentioned was how dull both the textual input and the image output were. The prompt was far from the evocative briefs or article drafts we usually receive from art directors, and the image was simply redundant with it, something any first-year illustration students learns not to do. And so here I'm curious to understand how computer scientists who design these models think about what text and images are, and more importantly, whose text and whose images are included or excluded from these definitions. So that's trap number two, the reduction of what text and images are. In this talk, I want to argue that text-to-image models don't threaten illustrators because they make pictures that look like their work, but because they reorganize who does creative work and who captures its value. They do so by reducing the production of images to a simple sequence from text to image and regulating who gets to create text and who gets to make images. By the end of this talk, I would like you to see AI not just as a technology that copies artists' works, but as a system that quietly rewrites the job description of an illustrator itself. So one way I explored these questions was through an experiment that I conducted with a few illustrators and an AI model. As you know, it is rare for illustrators, or anthropologists for that matter, to be invited to AI labs. So instead of waiting for an invitation, I decided to train my own model. I wanted to understand what it meant to design, train, and use an automated system to copy someone's style. And I wanted to know what illustrators thought about it. So I invited 4 friends to use and evaluate a model trained on their style. The models I was interested in are style transfer algorithms. Style transfer algorithms are systems that I can interpret, extract, and apply the style of an image to another. And that's what the UI of the model that we used in the experiment that I conducted looks like. One infamous example of their abilities came to public prominence in the case of Holly Mangert, whose work was used to train a model to reproduce her style, obviously without her consent. These models are often fine-tuning models, which means that they are add-ons to foundation models like Stable Diffusion. This makes them particularly efficient and low cost, and therefore easily available to anyone with the minimum coding skills. In my case, I worked with a colleague from Columbia University to help me with the technical part of the experiment. The whole process was done securely and did not contribute to any publicly available system. The experiment unfolded in intimate settings, in people's homes, where I would spend an afternoon over coffee, chatting about illustration as my laptop slowly generated images. I'll give you a brief overview of the experiment through 2 short stories about what is at stakes in the training and the use of the model. Together, these stories will give you a sense of how the various assumptions computer scientists make about text and image trickle down to make certain things impossible. So one of the fundamental concepts in style transfer algorithms is content-style disentanglement. Content-style disentanglement is the idea that a model can separate what an image shows from how it looks. So the idea is that you can take an image, here, paintings from Van Gogh, and apply an extracted style, whatever that means, and apply it to an image. In practice, what this would look like is this. So this is the data set that I've used for training the model in my own work. You can see it's made out of image files with my illustrations and text files, which are named exactly the same way as the image files, in which I described the image in purely semantic terms. This made the process incredibly difficult. This distinction between style and content is far from being simple. An example of this challenge is the focus on eliminating what they call content leakages, transfers of certain semantic elements of an image into another. I'll give you an example. I interviewed Seth, a researcher working on style transfer, who encountered such leakage while training his model. His goal was to apply a Michelangelo style to photographs of faces, but as he trained the model, the human faces started becoming greener and greener, and they developed a bandana over their eyes. The model was applying semantic features, not of Michelangelo the artist, but the Ninja Turtle. Style and content were inherently leaky. But more than a technical challenge, content style disentanglement rewrote whose labor is visible or not. Once disentangled, style becomes objectified, standardized, and made available in the black box of the algorithms, while language becomes the only modality of a workers need to make images. On Reddit, a user commenting on style transfer wrote, "It is very probable that we will have a market for styles now that we can mechanize their reproduction and package them into files." What this person doesn't say, of course, is that this market already exists. Only those styles are attached to artists who spend years cultivating them and are hired and trusted for their expertise. The technical feat of disentangling style from content, image from text, is an economic feat of disentangling artists' work from their labor. But can we really make images through the split process? Can we use a model that is based on such a disentangled version of an image? Once our doppelgangers were ready, I invited illustrators to use and evaluate them. Before using her model, Simone, a pseudonym, one of the participants, asked me whether she should prompt the model as an art director or an illustrator. What she meant was whether she should give an evocative brief that poses a problem for the model to solve, like an art director would to an illustrator, or if she should write a description of the image she wanted. The future that text-to-image models foster is one where images are made with words. But whose words? An art director? An editor? A client? An illustrator? This is the kind of questions computer scientists rarely ask themselves when developing such technologies. Picture a meeting with a marketing team brainstorming ideas for a campaign visual. They have never put pen to paper, never studied the differences between language and images, never considered that something that sounds great might actually look terrible, that some solutions can only emerge by the practice of figuring things out visually. And yet, here they are, armed with a text-to-image promise that images can be made with words. This, any illustrator knows, is a fallacy. A substantial proportion of illustrators' work is actually to interpret and translate clients' often poorly expressed words into operational visual directions and to go beyond these demands and offer unexpected solutions. As we used her model, Simone quickly noticed that even if a style was supposedly encoded in the doppelganger, it still depended on whose words we were using as a prompt. Consider the following prompt, 2 characters talking, and how Simone prompted her own model, a tree and an overproportionally big flower on an island in the foreground with a person sleeping underneath it. In the background, a lake and mountain. Wind is blowing through the tree. It is dusk. Birds are flying. I'll show you the images generated for both prompts. As we looked at the results from both, Simone and I found that the images generated by her prompt were more like her style than the ones that I had generated beforehand. If style and content were truly separate, my 2-word prompt and her paragraph should have produced images that felt equally Simone-like. They didn't. What made those images more like her wasn't just the encoded style, it was her favorite themes, the way she stacks spaces, the feelings she's drawn to. This points to a crucial aspect of illustration work that AI misses. Style is not something you have, possess, like a commodity. It's something you do, practice. It's embodied. This means it can't be separated from you, the choices you make, the life you live. This experiment taught me that these models are not neutral technologies that can be used by so-called good or bad actors, like they are often framed in mainstream discourse. Regardless of who uses them, the design already embeds cultural, economic, political assumptions that make some worlds possible and others not. If there is one thing you remember from this talk, it's this. Text-to-image models do not threaten illustrators because of the images they can generate. Outputs are not a good framing to understand AI's threat to illustrators because illustrators' value has never been limited to generating outputs. These models are a threat because they take the vast expanse of illustrators' expertise and skills and shrink it into a linear equation from text to image. And in doing so, they remodel what illustration is to fit the concentration of power away from illustrators' hands into clients' words. Instead of competing on AI's rhetorical terrain, using its terms, it is time for artists to develop their own ways of framing the debate in their own terms.